Thank you very much for everybody joining today. And what I'm going to talk to you about is research ethics, especially focusing on human studies. So I will start just with the, hold on, how do I move my slides? No, here. So first of all, what is the definition? When we talk about working with people or working with samples collected with human, for example, from a biobank, we call this research preclinical or clinical research. So clinical research is a comprehensive study of either the safety and effectiveness of promising advances in patient care. So there are three main aims of clinical research. One is to understand a biological process that is related to humans, diagnose a disease, or treat a disease. And when we talk about clinical research, we divide it into three different categories. The first one, which is very common, is a so-called observational study. In this case, we just watch people, so we monitor the progression of their disease, for example, and that there is no intervention, there is no treatment done. The second one is a questionnaire and a survey. These studies are also not interventional because there is no treatment applied. What happens here is that we follow, for example, the quality of the life of the patients. We collect information on side effects and non-life-threatening difficulties that patients might be exposed to. And the third one, which is probably the best known and best established, are the actual interventional clinical trials where treatments are applied to the patient. Okay? So it is very important that this research is carried out in an ethical way. And if we look back in the history, there are glaring examples where ethical considerations were not in the forefront, and it wasn't even established in studies in the past. So the first example, what I'd like to explain is the human experiments that took place during World War II. In World War II, prisoners of war were used as research subjects. The aim of this research was military and in some level understandable because the Nazi army wanted to develop better methods, better treatments to improve the health of their own soldiers, enable faster recovery from injuries, for example, bullet wounds. But these experimentations were horrendous, and I'm not going to go into the detail. There was no consideration of the humans that were included in these studies. The second one is the thalidomide. I don't know whether you have heard of it. Thalidomide was the morning sickness pill, which was given to pregnant women to help in morning sickness. And it was very, very efficient in that. So if you look a little bit back, thalidomide was developed as a tranquilizer for animals by a Swiss pharma company. But the company was bought up by another German company who was focusing on developing antibiotics, which were in high demand at the time. And during the study of thalidomide, a serendipitous discovery was made that thalidomide actually helps in the morning sickness. And at the time, thalidomide had been tested on individuals, but none of these individuals included pregnant women. And there was no due diligence done analyzing what might be a side effect. However, thalidomide caused aberrant body formation, and many tens of thousands of babies who were born were disfigured limbs, either arms or legs. And this was a major tragedy due to omission of considering that pregnant women might respond differently to a drug than an older man would. And the third trial, what I have here, is the Tuskegee case. So the Tuskegee case examined the disease progression of syphilis, which is a very valid point. And examining diseases, and how it becomes a very degradative disease in the body is an important study. And participants of this study were undereducated people, mostly Black people in the US. And what happened here is because the doctors were more interested in the pathophysiology of the disease than the well-being of their patients. Even when medication was available against syphilis, it was not offered to these people. They were kept in the dark. They were told that there is no such medication existing. So consider this question. If we have a very serious disease, and there is a high probability that lives can be saved, should doctors ever be allowed to experiment on patients without their consent? Considering that maybe sacrificing a couple of lives might save in the future thousands of them. So what is the right answer to this? Would it be yes, no, or it depends, how severe this disease is? So this question, of course, the answer is that it should never be allowed. And this was the first ethical code and agreement that was established in 1947, the Nuremberg Code, which states that participation of everybody in the study has to be voluntary. This was further reviewed and strengthened in the Declaration of Helsinki. So anytime when you write an ethics application that involves human participants or human samples, you will refer to the Declaration of Helsinki from 1964, where the core statement is that any human study has to keep the health of the patient as at the complete forefront, and there is nothing that could mitigate this purpose. So this was the very first statement that guides nowadays human studies. But is this sufficient? We could consider a clinical trial that would recruit only low-income patients. For example, the clinical trial would offer a compensation, a financial compensation for the participants. In this way, low-income patients are easier to enroll. Are we facing an ethical issue here? Would it be whether the patients would need to be consented to this study? Would it be that the risk to benefit ratio is not optimal, or is it fairness? So this was another big topic that was discussed and agreement was achieved, and this became known as the Belmont Report. And this was based on the Tuskegee syphilis case. So of course, fairness is the most important and most relevant point here, which with other words is justice. Justice or fairness in sharing the burdens and the benefits. So in this way, the vulnerable populations need to be protected. Additionally, the Belmont Report also covers that any participant in any study, including just a tissue sample from them, would need to be carried out with respect, which means that every participant will need to consent to the study. Their privacy has to be protected, and everything has to be carried out in a confidential manner. And the final third point, which is equally important, is the beneficence, which is the balance between benefit versus risk. Anytime when we study something unknown, there is an inherent risk with it. But the benefit, the foreseeable benefit, always have to outweigh the risk, and the risk needs to be minimized, which means that we need to include data safety and data monitoring. So after the Belmont Report, these principles were applied to all clinical research. However, the details were varied from country to country. So An international harmonization was required, and this was achieved in 1996 at the International Conference of the Harmonization of Good Clinical Practice. So this is the modern practice guidelines that can be used internationally, and studies or collaborations where multiple countries are involved can be used as a specific guideline. So when we look at what is bioethics, bioethics is really figuring out what is the right way of doing a research. And ethical values and these principles are set up to help us to decide how we should approach a certain study, how we should behave, and what do we need to do if something goes wrong. So for example, if we consider, should we pay people or donate money to people to participate in a clinical trial? Or should we pay people to donate their organ or not? Should we use, for example, genetically modified crops? Or should we use animals in any study replacing human participants? So these are all questions that bioethics deals with and guides us how we design our projects and studies. Within bioethics, we can create sub-branches in it. The first one is medical ethics, and this will deal with healthcare issues. We also have research ethics. Research ethics is a lower level before anything is introduced into healthcare, and it can be much broader than that. For example, stem cell research. It can be environmental ethics. These are covering issues that pertains the relationship between human activities and the environment. And finally, public health ethics, which addresses ethical issues in public health. So what I'm going to do now is, rather than talk you through the various different principles, there is a 15-minute video. This is a video created as a case study. This is not a real clinical trial, but it is done really, really well. But I would like you to watch this video with me and consider what might be the ethical issues in it. So the first half of the video will actually outline the disease area, the importance of studying this disease. Then there will be interviews with the lead clinician who explains why this clinical trial is important. And then it will continue on by listening to the actual research ethics committee and what kind of ethical concerns they could see. So hopefully I can start this video here. Okay, 1 minute. I assume you still only see my slides, not the video. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let me just change my screen that I'm sharing, which is share here. 1 second. This one. Hopefully. Okay, can you see this video here?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Over 1 million children in Britain have asthma. It's the most common chronic disease amongst young people.
Life with Ruby's been difficult. From a very young age, she's had asthma. We've been in and out of hospital. We have chest infections. It's not been great ever since she was tiny. And it is frightening. It's frightening for the whole family as well as Ruby.
Ruby has had a lot of hospital admissions, and she has had what I would say is severe asthma over a number of years. There have been times when the asthma has been life-threatening for Ruby.
This board shows Ruby's morning and nighttime medicines, so we know what to give her.
I can do my inhalers by myself, but Mummy helps me do my tablet.
Most children with asthma take a blue and brown inhaler, but as Ruby's asthma is more severe, she's on a long list of additional daily medication.
She takes a lot of medicine. You'd look at her normally and think she's a well little girl, but a lot of medicines make her be that person. Okay, that one. Good girl.
What do you think about taking all these medicines in the morning?
Okay, but I don't like it.
Children's outpatients. Hello there, can I help you?
The professor is Ruby's doctor and a pioneer in the treatment of children with asthma.
Quite well.
Yes.
These are.
Today she's having a routine checkup to see how her current medication is working.
We've had to see Ruby quite frequently in the clinics. We've had to very carefully fine-tune her treatment, add different medicines.
So, is it up, doctor? Yeah. You know, do the blow machine? Yes. See what is, make sure your medicine's all okay.
Additional treatment for children with severe asthma involves trying several different drugs over time to see what works best. But the professor believes the genes of children like Ruby may make one drug more effective than another. It's not about the quantity of drugs, but taking the right one that matters.
Yeah, I'm on through then. Do what we normally do.
You sometimes find that the child is on 3 or 4 different medicines and they are expected to take it continuously, regularly, month in and month out, year in and year out.
Let's get you weighed and measured.
We have started to question whether this is indeed the right way of treating asthma, particularly in children, because we found 15% of children, for example, carry a particular genetic change which makes them resistant to certain medicines that we commonly use in asthma therapy. And we've started to ask the question whether in these children it would be appropriate to withdraw medicines and substitute the medicine with something else. But this model needs to be tested through scientific studies.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi, back to
The
you.
professor is keen to test his theory. He wants to undertake a clinical drug trial where 100 children will have their DNA taken. If they fall into the 15% of children whose genes are resistant to the standard asthma medication, they'll be given a drug called Verabreath. The 100-strong control group, who won't have their DNA tested, will stay with the standard medication, Exhalin.
I'm trying to get the application through to the ethics committee as soon as possible. The last date is today, and almost finished it. I just need to lots of T's and lots of Y's and so on.
The professor may believe his medical research is imperative to help children like Ruby, but first, his work has to be independently assessed.
An ethics committee is made up of people from all walks of life. Their job is to look at the research plan from their own perspective and to decide whether they think this is the right way to go about it.
Whether this piece of proposed research will ever see the light of day and become a medical trial is now in the hands of these 6 people.
I think it's difficult to get drug trials approved in general. It is always a lot harder when it involves children, because children are a vulnerable population.
How are you? Nice to see you. Ethics committees have a little bit of a bad reputation. Sometimes people think we like to get in the way of what they want to do, but we're absolutely committed to helping good research go forward. But at the same time, it's our responsibility to make sure that the risks and the benefits weigh out in a good way, and that people really do care about protecting the interests of the very good individuals who volunteer to be part of their study.
The professor's design for this proposed clinical trial is about to be put under the microscope, along with the information sheet he intends to give to parents and the accompanying consent forms. Only if it bears up to careful scrutiny will it get the go-ahead.
Has everybody had a chance to look at the protocol and the accompanying paperwork? Great. So basically my reading of it is that we're looking at children with quite severe asthma. So these are children and young people whose condition isn't well controlled with the standard 2 inhalers.
So my understanding is that the first group will be tested for this MAS gene. And if they're positive, they will be given Verabreath. And if they're negative, they'll be given Exhalin. We would be taking them all off the medication for 2 weeks beforehand. I think brings a scientific and a ethical question in terms of, is it right to take them off the medication and have them on this washout? It would be more appropriate, in my view, to recruit children as they start to come to the point where they need that third line of defence drugs.
There's a lot of nodding around the table. Do people share those concerns? Simon?
Is it ethical to recruit children when we know that some of them will be harmed by getting one of the study drugs, which is the Exhalin? And I think that has to be managed really carefully. We need to think about the ethical issues about that control group.
This is something that's perhaps underplayed in the information that's given to parents. Certainly, I think it is an issue, particularly with children that might suffer more severely from their asthma. And you might end up with a situation where these children are excluded from the study because it's not safe for them to have a washout period.
I think there's really very little information in here about what the risks are of participating in this study, and they've really haven't given any information about what happens if their child gets worse during the washout period. There's nobody who to contact, where to get advice from.
And whilst we're talking about gaps in information, I understand that it's proposed they'll take saliva, and we can't tell you how we'll use it in the future.
No.
Well, given current furore around DNA databases and spy industry, I don't feel very comfortable with that at all.
That's also entirely omitted from the assent form and the consent form for both the children and young people and the parents. So that's something that they most certainly need to explicitly give consent for, and I find it remarkable that they've missed it out from those forms.
I think it's inappropriate, wholly inappropriate to, I think they determine that they will seek permission from children to take part, but they only require parental consent. We're talking about some young people who are 15, 16, 17, 18. They're old enough to vote, some of them. They're old enough to have children, and yet we're treating them like very young children themselves. And I thought that was mirrored by some of the language in the documentation for families. I thought it was both too complex for 7-year-olds and too patronising for 18-year-olds, and there wasn't enough nuance in it. It didn't seem to me as if the research team really understood children and young people. I feel a little concerned we treat them as subjects of research.
That's interesting, because I don't know if you noticed that horrible word did slip in one of the documents. So we're certainly going to have to warn against that.
I noticed that the word subject had been used rather than participant, both in the application form to us, but also in the information that would be provided to children and young people, and also to their parents and carers, which just isn't best practice.
So it's one of the problems that nobody has spoken up front to young people about what's important to them, and therefore what might count as a good outcome measure for this project.
I think there could be some important outcome measures about being able to participate in sports and how it's affected that, or participating in social activities, or how they felt in general, whether they felt better or worse. I think that kind of information would be really important, particularly for the children and young people that have this condition.
Yes, the school stuff's important, but it's not necessarily going to make me say, well, I'm happy to now start using this medication. I want some good quality endpoints. So, how much do they use their reliever medication, what their peak flow is, what their lung function tests are. That kind of information is of relevance to me as a clinician.
Incentives. It's interesting, isn't it, in this project that there is a small reward. I have to say it's very small in the scheme of things, a £20 voucher. First of all, if we're going to incentivise or reward, I think we have to think, is it at an appropriate level? How would you feel as an 18-year-old if you'd come for 4 additional appointments, kept a diary, logged in on a more or less daily basis, and you get a £20 voucher at the end?
I'd feel wholly insulted and patronised, frankly. It's not like when we were 18. 20 quid's not a lot of money these days. And it doesn't get you very far.
I don't think we can underestimate children's sort of altruistic motives for taking part in these sort of studies. And actually, I don't have a problem with £20. I think it's just a nice little gesture. If you gave too much, it would be a little bit over the top, and I would worry more about that. It's just a sort of a cherry on top of the cake.
So everything brings us back to the science, doesn't it? We've got to go back to these researchers and say to them that it's a job worth doing, but it has to be done to a very high scientific standard. We're not comfortable with the current study design. And we think in redesigning the project, it's going to be crucially important to involve children and young people from the outset so that we can dismiss Des's fears about subjects rather than participants, and that the risks and benefits and potential benefits are set out clearly from the outset.
If the children, young people and parents themselves were allowed to sort of be part of the development of the study, understand the important questions being asked, they're more likely to understand the whole process and to initially sort of consent to take part to it, but actually to sort of stay with the study too.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think I've got a long and rather diplomatic letter to write, but I think we've given this our best, and I hope that we'll get a new protocol in within due course that we can look at again. Thanks very much. Thank you.
For passionate professionals like the Professor, who are keen to pioneer new medical treatments for debilitating conditions like rubies, waiting for a decision from the Ethics Committee can be an anxious time.
I'm pretty sure they're going to ask us to make some changes, but it's very important for me to find out whether they are, in principle, backing the proposal or not. So let's see. Ooh. The committee is keen to work with you to enable this valuable project to go ahead. However, they have said that they have a number of concerns about the apparent lack of involvement of children and young people in developing the trial design. So they are not very pleased with us referring to the children as subjects rather than participants. And I think that's a very fair point. And they want to see us involving children and young people right through the period of the study. And I think we can achieve this. I don't think that's going to be a problem.
One of the Ethics Committee's most serious concerns was a 2-week washout period. They felt it put children like Ruby at too great a risk.
There is quite a lot of evidence to indicate that it's safe to stop medicines for 2 weeks. And I need to make the committee aware of these studies. And secondly, and I think just as importantly, because if we say that we are going to recruit patients right at the time when the third-line defense medicine has been started, this trial will take 10 years to complete. It would need a much larger amount of money. We would have to recruit in many different clinics, and it may not be feasible.
Having enough information to decide whether to take part in a clinical trial is what's most important. At the end of the day, the success or failure of groundbreaking new medical research like this relies on the participation of children like Ruby.
So I hope you liked and you understood this video. Let me just find my way back to the screen. Where am I? Might have lost my Zoom window. Stop sharing. Okay. So to summarize this video is what I hope to achieve with this is that you can see that the researcher's angle and the ethics committee angle is different. But it is very, very important to understand all of it. Everything has the foundation of important research and benefit of the research. Then it's usually second time combined with the clinician's view how to make this clinical trial working, considering the financial restraint, considering that it might be a rare patient population, and how to get the best results that is needed for a clinical decision. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that may not be in the forefront of the clinician, which is the respect towards the participants, considering, their decision-making ability, and making it fair on everybody, and minimize the risks. And this is what the ethics committee does, and this is what all human and the biomedical research has to focus on. So I just switch back to bring everything together and review these points which are essential for clinical studies. Now just go back to my slides. I think PowerPoint slideshow, this one. Okay, can somebody confirm me that you can see the slide which says what are research ethics committees?
Yes, in full screen.
Yes, perfect, perfect. So research ethics committees are made up of people, as you could see in the video as well, that they have a different expertise. Some of them are clinicians, some of them are patient advocates, and some of them are experts in, for example, data management and confidentiality questions. And they will provide an opinion, while you could see that the ethics committee discusses a lot of different opinions, and it can be very critical. They all kept in the forefront whether this clinical study is important or not. And typically a research ethics committee works together with the researcher to develop the best design for the clinical study. So let me see how I can move on. Okay. So to summarize this, that the overarching objective of clinical research is to develop a generalizable knowledge that would improve health or increase our understanding of human biology. And the subjects, when you understand that we very rarely call them subjects, these are participants, and they are essential as means to secure this knowledge. But at the same time, we place these people at risk of harm for the good of the others. And that's why we have to be very, very careful, because clinical research has the potential for exploitation of human subjects, and this must be avoided. The ethical requirements for clinical research aims to minimize the possibility of exploitation, minimize the risk participants are exposed to, and they are treated with respect. According to this, there are 7 requirements which needs to be considered and addressed in any kind of biomedical research. And these are, skip this one, because I think this is summary. The first is the social and scientific value. As you could see from the video as well, it is very clear if we can reduce the number of medications and the amount of side effects asthma patients, children or adults take, is a clear social and scientific value. The scientific validity is how we approach this. Do we already have this information, or is it novel? The next point is the fair subject selection. Should we focus on children, young adults, elderly, which areas of social life, which gender, and so on? The next one is the favorable risk-to-benefit ratio. If you consider the video, the risk-to-benefit ratio was well assessed. From the clinician's point of view, the benefit is eliminating unnecessary drugs or eliminating the need of taking several drugs for the duration of a life of a person. From the ethics committee point of view, they brought up the risk. That was the washout period. What happens if a person doesn't take their medication for 2 weeks? What kind of support system is there if there is an adverse effect? What are the contacts for people who go through this clinical trial? Are there any alternatives already existing that have the same benefit and there is no need for a clinical trial? Another option for risk-benefit ratio is, which is very interesting from the areas of blood cancers. While we believe that earlier diagnosis leads to better treatment, it's not always the case. This has been studied in chronic lymphocytic leukemia, where the finding was that there is no point treating CLL before it becomes aggressive. There was no benefit brought to the patients. So these are important questions for risk-benefit. The next one is independent review. An independent review is always required to have an unbiased opinion. The next one is an informed consent. The informed consent ensures that participation is voluntary, but it goes beyond that. The informed consent also means that the participants fully understand what is the trial about, how does it happen, what are the steps, what their involvements are. Also, they understand what might be associated risks and what might be associated benefits of it. For example, if we talk about a clinical trial, we always need to have a control group and a treatment group. The control group usually gets a placebo treatment. So this is a same regime of treatment, but the active ingredient is missing from the treatment. And an ethical question arises. If this treatment is really successful, is it ethical to put people into the placebo group? How is it addressed? People need to be explained that it is selected at random, for example, who goes into the placebo group and who goes into the treatment group. And they are not going to know it, which group they are included. If you were a patient, would you be happy with it? To participate, go through the whole process, knowingly that you are not getting an active treatment. And you might have a disease for which there is no current medication. All of these things have to be explained very clearly to the patients. While I'm not here to give you all the answers, but I can give you a short answer for this one. Typically, what is detected with data monitoring, if there is very clear benefit of the treatment, after a sufficient period of time, people can be switched from the placebo group into the actual treatment group to make sure that they also receive the benefit of the new treatment. So in summary, the informed consent is very important, that people participate voluntarily and they fully understand what the research is. And finally, the last point is respect for potential and enrolled subjects. Respect means that they are informed in every way and their confidentiality and personal details are protected. In the example video, a point came up, which was that DNA is collected from these samples from saliva. But nobody mentioned to how many other studies this DNA might be used, or whether the actual DNA sequences will be released and become publicly available. This now cannot happen. These are the general data protection regulations which are in place in Europe. But these are very important considerations. How we enable confidentiality. So finally, what I would like to emphasize is that while these studies and what we best understand is using human participants, the same rules apply for simple tissue samples from human. They also need to be treated the same way with the same principles. So there is a lot of information, and if you ever have to fill things out, there will be a publication. Before we go on, although we couldn't set up a poll for this talk, but let's go through these questions and see what you think about them. So the first question is, which of the following are key elements of an ethics committee evaluates in a clinical trial proposal? First, the risk-benefit balance for participants, the scientific validity of whether the study will generate high-impact publications. So out of these ones, the ethics committee will definitely assess the risk-benefit balance, and it will also assess the scientific validity. But it will not assess whether there will be a high-impact publication or not. If we move to the next question, which data-related aspects are part of an ethics review? First one, protection of participant confidentiality and data security, compliance with data protection regulations, or the choice of the statistical software for analysis. So out of this, again, the first two are absolutely in the merit of a research committee, but not the third one. And the final question is, which broader considerations are part of an ethical review? Whether the research questions justifies involving human participants, whether alternative methods were considered, and whether the study aligns with current scientific trends. So very importantly, it is an ethical consideration whether the research question justifies involving human participants, or a tissue sample is sufficient. It is also considering whether alternative methods were considered, for example, preclinical models or animal models. But it will not consider whether the study aligns with current scientific trends. I see we have the poll here coming up. If you can access it, although I have given you the answers, you can try to do them. I'll just give 1 minute for it and we can see. No, it's okay. I see that you already know the answer, so I'll just end this poll if I can. Yeah. So as the last bit, there is a lot to learn about biomedical research and the guidance. And this article, although this is from 2000, this summarizes the 7 major pillars for bioethical research. And I can recommend this article. So it will explain what are these 7 requirements, provides a framework for evaluation, and gives excellent examples how these elements have to be considered for ethical biomedical research. So I will stop here. And if you have any questions, suggestions, I'd be happy to discuss them.